out of Milestone's initial launch titles, Static was the one that I was most excited for. Not because of the creative team, but because I was familiar with Static, and I was excited to see the character return to the world of comic books. But I have to admit that I was not terribly excited by the creative team for Static, and honestly, for any of the launch titles. I've read a few comics by Vida Ayala, the scribe of Static, and Reginald Hudlin, who wrote Icon and Rocket, and I'll admit that I honestly didn't care much for either of the books that I've read. I had heard of Hardware's author before, Brandon Thomas, but I had never personally read any of his work, so I came into that hoping to learn what he wrote like, and I certainly did, but I didn't have much enthusiasm going into that. With the second wave of titles, Duo and Blood Syndicate, Duo was the book that I was looking forward to the most, and it was for one reason. Author Greg Pak. I know Pak best as a writer for Marvel Comics. He is the mind behind the epic Planet Hulk storyline, its follow-up crossover event World War Hulk, as well as several years of really excellent Hulk comics. This isn't the only thing that he has written, of course. He has written an ongoing series for Storm, War Machine, Alpha Flight, a whole new generation of the Agents of Atlas, the Extreme X-Men, and there was even a volume of Weapon X only a couple years ago. He is the co-creator of Scar, Son of Hulk, co-creator of Weapon H, the soldier with both Wolverine's claws and Hulk-like strength, and he co-wrote one of Hercules' longest ongoing series with fellow author Fred Van Lente. He wrote the Magneto Testament miniseries as well, revealing Magneto's real first name for the first time, and he also did a pretty good Silver Surfer comic in the early, 2005s, 2010s. All of those comics I own, all of them I have read, and to some degree or another, all of them I have loved. Some of them are better than others, sure, but to me, Greg Pak is a solid writer. I have never turned up to a book that he has written and walked away hating it. So what does Pak bring to the table this time? Well, first off, Duo is the first Milestone comic that is not set in Dakota. As part of the Earth M line of titles, Duo is meant to broaden the horizons of the Milestone universe, adding new locations, characters, and concepts. The designation, Earth M, is a clear indicator of Milestone's existence as part of the DC multiverse. The M standing for Milestone, of course. Improved representation is a cornerstone of what Milestone was hoping to create when it first launched, and Duo continues that idea as well. Where the previous titles all starred characters of African descent, or an alien that looked that way, Duo stars Kelly Vu, a darker-skinned Vietnamese American, and David Kim, a Korean American. Kelly and David are happily engaged and are madly in love, living together in San Francisco and working together, and somehow they still stand each other. They are developing a new strain of nanobots that are capable of replicating the cells of their host and stimulating tissue growth. They visit healerist injuries and demonstrate their technology to the head of new projects, an older-looking gentleman named Marius Chung. They clip the branch off of a bonsai tree, let the nanobots swarm the tree, and new growths sprout from the cut stump. Ideally, their nanobots can be used to repair wounds, heal damaged tissue, and overall save lives. All of it without cutting up a patient or needing to swap organs or do any intricate work. But the new growth on the tree curls and twists. It is clearly the same plant matter as the rest of the tree, but the growth is wild and uncontrolled and, quite frankly, ugly. If that happened to a human being, well, it would not be pleasant. That is why they're here. It would take trillions of generations of nanobot AI development to train them more specifically in tissue growth. That process could take years and cost who knows how many lives in the meantime. They want to develop a human interface, something that will allow them to control the nanobots mentally with just a thought. But they need money to do it, and they hope that Healerist will be able to provide that. Marius sees the value in their work. They could, literally, heal all the ills of the world. No one would need to die if these nanobots were perfected. But this machine-to-human interface that they want to develop, it's only a step away from a human-to-human interface, even if that's not their goal. Sharing not just information between minds, but sensations, emotions? Marius doesn't know about that. He knows that he tries to be a good person as often as possible every damn day. But if he had someone else living in his mind, or even just sharing his thoughts, they would hate his guts. He cannot fund their project. But he will offer to buy them out. Marius offers them $1 billion for their research. Kelly and David turn him down. The money sounds nice. I mean, hell, the money sounds great. But they aren't really doing this for the money. Their goal is to make the world a better place. They'll find a sponsor somewhere. The pair return home, playfully flirt for a little while, have some sex, and then get some sleep. David wakes up in the night, and as he exits their bedroom, he notices that there is a light on in the lab. When he goes to check it out, someone or something has broken in. The figure is humanoid, but bent at the shoulders with a long, thick neck connecting their head. They have long, thin limbs with 3 scraggly fingers and toes on each of their hands and feet. When David says something, they turn, make some kind of unintelligible sound, and then press a button on their belt. The explosion wakes Kelly up. She races to the lab, finding it a burning inferno. David lies before her, burning alive, and the nanobot swarm is freed from their stasis tube. They swarm and shift in the air, undirected, until Kelly grabs a headset. She puts it on and orders the swarm to help David. Help David! They start to repair the damage that was done to him, but the nanobots can't make something from nothing. They need materials to work with. So they begin to strip Kelly's body of its molecules, piece by piece. When David wakes up in the hospital, he is all alone, but there is a screaming in his head. David is taken to a morgue by a detective, a woman named Maya Trucco, and he identifies what is left of Kelly's body, and it's just scraps. Like, I'm talking just a skull and like a handful of bones. But the dental records match, and David recognizes the engagement ring that he bought her. Detective Trucco wants to know if anyone had reason to kill them, and how David survived the explosion relatively unscathed, but he claims not to know. He's got a guess, though. When David leaves, he goes to his car and stabs into his open palm with his car keys. The nanobot swarm swirls out of his hand, fixes the damage, and then sinks back into his body. He knows what happened, but he still can't explain the screaming in his head. David goes for a walk through a nearby park, turning this over in his mind. He spots a tail, though. 2 men that look a lot like the thing that blew up their lab. He veers off into the woods and is encircled by 5 of the things. They open up their coats and reveal more bombs strapped to their waists. Enraged by Kelly's death, his body on fire, a screaming in his brain, David attacks them. He's faster now, and stronger too, and we see that these things, whatever they are not human. Their skin is a pale, sickly gray, their faces just 2 beady eyes and a wide mouth. As one, their hands suddenly morph into blades, and they stab into David's chest and stomach. Consciously, this time, David orders the nanobots to heal him. And they do. They scour his enemies into nothing, using their mass to replace David's own. When they're done, David stands in the woods alone. A gold and white jumpsuit covers his body. Over that is his blue jacket, originally meant to protect him from the fall cold. The enemies are gone, but the screaming in his head hasn't stopped yet. Who is screaming? He asks. Inside his head, Kelly's voice answers. Isn't it obvious? Inside David's mind, we find him and Kelly. Both of them are wearing that golden jumpsuit. David tries to grab Kelly to embrace her, but they just pass through one another like ghosts. A roiling black pit beneath them has a hold of Kelly, and it pulls her down. She begs David not to leave her, but she's dead. She can't be here, he argues. She isn't dead, Kelly replies. She is inside his mind. When the bots saved David, they used Kelly to do it, and they must have transferred her consciousness as well. Kelly manages to just pull free of the darkness, but she is still scared by it. She can't feel anything in this state. She's just cold, constantly. She has to fight just to stay an active part of David's mind, or she'll fade away. She might even die. This begins to happen again, and the shadows try to pull her under. David suggests that they should go to Healerist. They'll have facilities to figure this out, but Kelly says no. Who do you think did this to us? My name is Ben, and this is Comic Book Breakdown episode 22.7, Duo. We learn over the course of the first issue that the nanobots used Kelly's body to repair David's wounded body, but when they did, they clearly also transferred her consciousness. Kelly now lives inside of David's mind. This is artistically depicted as a world of pink, lumpy flesh, like we are literally inside of a brain, and there's a dark, shadowy corner to it. As a mental ghost, Kelly can't feel anything. She has no body at all to feel with. But they do quickly learn that Kelly can feel what David feels, like pain or physical touch. Without that stimulus, though, or a problem to focus on, Kelly gets pulled down into that dark area, and she goes dormant, essentially. If she stays there long enough, there is a threat that maybe she'll fade away forever and be dead. At Healerist, we see a pair of those suicide bomber thing guys report back to Marius. They don't speak, they just make their sound, but he seems to understand them. Marius then gets up from his table. He opens a door-sized and shaped window at the side of his building and steps out of it. He doesn't fall, though. He steps on the clouds and then calls a family meeting. 12 figures join him in the clouds, each one dressed in clothing unfamiliar to our modern age. The humans think that they're going to save the world, he says, referring to David and Kelly's dream and their nanobots. But that's a job for real immortals. The opening few issues of the comic are basically a balancing act between the interpersonal drama going on between Kelly and David sharing a brain, the mystery of who tried to kill them and how they cope with their new existence, and the threat of this group of immortals who call themselves the Immutable. Immutable means unchanging, by the way. Eventually, Kelly and David do visit Marius Chung, suspecting that he is the one behind the attack on them. He was, and he is perfectly okay with admitting it. The Immutables have been policing humanity for thousands of years, he says. You see, about 1 in every 1 billion humans is immortal. They do appear to age, as Marius is a squat man of Asian descent with a hard-lined face and short-cut white hair. Like, he looks like he's in his 60s or 70s. He's definitely got some mileage on him. But he is actually 40,000 years old, so he looks good for his age. The Immutables do age, but they can recover from almost any level of physical harm, and we see Immutables get, massive chunks of their upper body, blasted away by the end of the comic, and they just recover from it, and they're fine. Every time that humanity gets closer to the secrets of immortality, the Immutables stop them from finishing the work. They did this at Pompeii, at Atlantis, at the Library of Alexandria. Because when a human mind has been alive for a few hundred years, they just stop caring about other people. Marius even admits that he has a hard time giving a crap, and he's one of the ones who cares the most, he says. The worst among them become sociopaths, content to do whatever they want to whoever they want. After all, humanity has the lifespan of a fly to them. What do they matter in the long run? Marius attempted to kill Kelly and David because their nanobots could potentially unlock immortality for the entire planet. That would mean a severe overconsumption of natural resources and space. Within maybe a generation or two, Marius fears that planet Earth would become unlivable to human beings. And he likes having a planet to live on. We meet several other immutables throughout the comic, including the sword-wielding, armored-up warrior Morian, the thin, patient Dawa, the far-seeing Gudrun, and the technologically skilled Ambrose. All of them dressed like bad cosplayers inspired by various cultures and time periods. Kelly and David are also pursued by Dr. Emrys Tinker, the founder and head of Tinker Technologies. He tried to attack David and Kelly as well, sending some circular drones to abduct them in issue 2. Tinker sees himself as a counter-agent to the immutables. Somehow, he knows about their existence and wants to stop their influencing of the world. After all, the world is mostly made up of mortals. Why should this select group of immortals run things behind the scenes? That's bullsh, as far as he's concerned. When he does get his hands on David and Kelly, Tinker makes them a very unique offer. His machines are capable of reading 2 different brain patterns in that body, and he is the only one who knows that David and Kelly are sharing a ride. But is David really sharing a body with Kelly? Or is he sharing a body with an AI construct, just a digital ghost? That is a super interesting line of thought. But neither Kelly nor David are interested in exploring it. Tinker then offers them an android body to place one of their minds into. Tinker even has one fit with the likeness of Kelly's face. See? This is what it's going to look like. You're going to look totally great. David is down for this idea, and he actually approaches an old colleague of theirs, Henrio, in issue 3, looking to separate their minds before this scene. David is the first one who's like, we gotta get out, we can't do this. We cannot live together in my head, we need to separate. However, Kelly does not like the idea of being put in an android body. Partially because she doesn't want an android body, but also because there is no way that someone like Tinker would just give them a body that he couldn't control or use or study or profit off of in some way. David argues that he's cool with it. He'll be the one to take the robot body, thank you, if necessary. But Kelly overrides him, and I don't just mean she says, no, you're not going to do that. I mean, she takes control of his body. They escape Tinker's possession, and she actually uses the nanobots to take control of Tinker's army of androids as well. Kelly has realized that, with the nanobots inside of David's body and under their mental control, they have all the power that they ever needed. They don't need the Immutables or Healerists' money anymore. They don't need Tinker as an ally or as a sponsor either. They can do whatever they want. No one can stop them. Kelly then visits a homeless camp that they visited earlier in the book and starts to use the nanobots to heal sick people. It is going great for a while, too, but they do encounter a problem. One of the people asks to be cured of cancer, and Kelly doesn't know how to cure cancer. Repairing a broken tooth or healing a skin rash is one thing, but cancer is an unchecked growth anyways. How does she fix that with nanobots that mainly regrow tissue? Locked inside of his own mind, David admonishes Kelly for reaching too far, for making themselves too public. They don't know how to do this yet, he says. But Kelly actually isn't deterred. Sure, she doesn't know how to stop cancer. Today. But they're going to keep practicing with their powers, and they'll continue to study how to use them. They'll find a way to cure cancer. Detective Maya Trucco, who had continued to investigate Kelly's death, has followed them, and she's basically is watching David Kim floating in midair, wearing a white and gold supersuit, controlling an army of androids with nothing but a thought, and healing the sick with a flick of his wrist. It's a miracle, as far as she's concerned. A single tear rolls down her cheek. Which is when an explosion rocks David and the area surrounding him. People scattered around him die, burn. Detective Trucco's face is blasted half off, and she lies on the ground, dying. Kelly goes into an almost shock-like state at this. She doesn't know what to do or even how to do it. David apologizes for being a pain inside her mind and just arguing with her since she took control. Maybe if they worked together, they could find a way to save Maya. They could find a way to do this. Standing on the overpass above them, Dr. Tinker and the Immutables have now allied. Tinker basically sold them on the idea that Kelly and David pose a threat to tomorrow. You see, when they started healing people, Marius actually is really cool with it. He was afraid that they were just going to hand out free, forever healing nanobots to the entire human populace. But if they're just going to play God and do stuff like cure broken bones and STDs, that's fine. Have at it. But Tinker knows that this free healing, it's going to garner them followers. Today, maybe a few dozen. But as time goes on, hundreds of people are going to flock to them. Thousands. And once word gets out, that's going to include people like billionaires, politicians, military leaders, people who have power and influence. Once those people get their hands on these nanobots, they will then have access to the technology needed to exploit or maybe even kill the Immutables. Unless all of them do something about it right now. So they do. Tinker is wielding a molecular disruptor, and he has actually punched a hole in David's chest with it. The Immutables charge in with more primitive weapons, and Ambrose opens a blue portal in the air while they're beating on David. This portal leads to the Ward, where the Immutables exile their less pleasant members. They plan to push David and Kelly in and just remove them from the Earth entirely. The Void starts to pull in nearby debris, which includes Detective Trucco's unconscious body. Kelly, piloting David's body, grabs it, noting that Detective Trucco is somehow still alive. She can save her, but not if they're stuck in a void dimension. Their fingers snap into sharp claws and then extend, reaching through the air and stabbing into the Immutables. Originally, I thought that the goal here was she sunk the claws into the Immutables to use them either as a brake to keep from getting pulled into the Ward, or she was using it as a way to drag them in with her and they would just shut the thing off. But conversation cues seem to indicate that whatever Kelly is doing here, she is causing the nanobots to either weaken or turn off the Immutables' immortality. How she's doing that, I don't really know, given that she can't cure cancer, but she can suddenly turn off immortality. I'm not sure. The scene does not do a whole lot to tell me what's happening here, and there's not really any good verbal cues or exposition to explain things in a more thorough fashion, so please bear with me. Whatever she is doing, it doesn't last for long as some massive forms come up behind her. These are the irredeemable, the exiled Immutables who don't care for humanity. They are easily twice the size of normal humans, if not bigger, and all of them are red-skinned for some reason. Some of them are horned, others have wings. One of them has replaced his forearms with two large bone-like stabbing spikes. These guys honestly look like demons, and they are angry, and they are ready for revenge. Their leader grabs Marius Chung and tosses him aside as they move deeper into San Francisco. David heals Marius and Maya, and then gets an info dump from the old man. These monsters were once members of the Immutables, those sociopaths that Mary's mentioned before, this is them, we get it. So now Tinker, the Immutables, and David and Kelly have to team up in order to stop them. David and Kelly have a brief moment of confusion here. You see, David doesn't want to fight. This isn't what he wanted at all. He is not a superhero. He surrenders the body to Kelly, who knows that she can't do this alone. They need to work together to stop the Irredeemable. It's the only way. Tinker gets the attention of one of the Irredeemables, and he nearly dies for it, but then David and Kelly step in. They try to lure the Irredeemables away from the city and all of the people, but they do not fall for it. What people? They say. Everyone here is going to die sooner rather than later. Why should they care? You're immortal, right? Their leader says. You're going to learn soon enough that when you're immortal, you can do whatever you want to whoever you want. Well, David and Kelly say, they're not going to let them. The leader snorts. You're all alone. What are you gonna do? David's body twitches. Suddenly, Kelly's face and head grow out of the back of David's. 2 more arms and legs sprout from his back and shoulders, facing the same direction as Kelly's face. He isn't alone. Their hands reach out, extending and branching, stabbing into the irredeemables. They wrap them all up in their fingers and their nano-flesh, and the immutables push them all back into the ward. Before they're sealed in, though, Tinker blasts David and Kelly in the chest again. Marius is horrified by this betrayal, but Tinker remains calm. His goal is to save the world from all immortals, and that includes David Kim. The damage is quickly being repaired, but the last of the irredeemables raises a clawed hand in order to strike at David, but Marius charges in. He knocks back the monster and tells Tinker to close the portal. How Tinker is going to close the portal opened by Ambrose with a molecular disruptor, I don't know, but somehow he does. As the portal into the ward seals, Marius tells David that maybe having someone share your thoughts wouldn't be such a bad thing. Maybe it wouldn't make you want to destroy the world. After so many centuries of being right, maybe he was wrong about them. That's a lovely thought. And then the portal is closed. Morian says goodbye to David. After the injuries that they have sustained today, protecting the world is going to be his job. Good luck. And then the immutables fly away, leaving David and Kelly with Tinker. Once again, he offers to work with them. They don't believe him, though. He would want to study them, to use this technology, this power, for his own ends. They subdue his androids, leaving him with no way of stopping them or capturing them, and then begin to walk away. But they aren't alone when they do it. The crowd of people that they helped surround them, including Detective Trucco. And maybe that'll be enough. The comic ends with Tinker on a phone call with the President of the United States of America. The existence of this duo is going to upset the power balance of the world, all right. David Kim and Kelly Vu are absolutely a threat to stability in America and the world. But, he adds, so is he. In a stasis tube inside Tinker's lab is a massive female member of the Irredeemables. I hope you don't mind that I cut out a lot of the personal drama between Kelly and David in order to get the plot synopsis across, dear listener, because it is definitely present in this comic. Much like Icon and Rocket, Kelly and David are really designed to complement each other. David is quiet, thoughtful, and artistic. He's a poet and a dreamer, and when their situation gets weird, he is the one who wants to stop and figure things out before just rushing into anything. Kelly, on the other hand, is all action. She understands situations immediately, and she wants to do something about it right now. When the book opens and we're meeting the pair for the first time, Kelly is actually wearing a Wonder Woman t-shirt, which hints at the kind of person that she is. She idolizes those who do good, who help others, and she wants to make a similar difference in the world. This balances the two characters out well, but it also leads to a lot of conflict in the comic between them. For example, in issue 3, we see Detective Trucco questioning David about Kelly's death. Trucco suspects that David might have killed Kelly in order to have their research, and any money gained from it, all to himself. So she starts leading the witness, so to speak, asking, did you and Kelly ever argue? Did you ever fight? And David is answering honestly, yeah, sure we did, but, there was nothing serious. Inside his head, Kelly can see what Trucco is trying to do, and she's trying to get David to shut the floop up, man. Finally, David just outright says that, yeah, they fought. Sometimes they drove each other crazy. Sometimes David couldn't tell if they completed each other or if he was the one holding her back. That is some great personal insight right there, my man, and it is compelling as hell. So there's this constant push and pull between the two of them in every situation that they encounter, and that makes for some really dynamic storytelling. However, it also leads to a bit of a disjointed storytelling, as David and Kelly don't really ever have a goal or a mission in this comic. Their overall goal is to help humanity, sure, but they're so caught up in figuring out their situation, and honestly fighting for their lives, that they never really have a chance to formulate a plan or a mission statement. I know that Static, for example, is going to be dealing with Bang Baby-related problems. Hardware appeared to be setting up a conflict with Icon, and of course, Icon and Rocket are fighting the drug trade. But what are Kelly and David trying to do? Even with the book now over, having read all 6 issues, I don't really know. Just keep healing the sick, I guess? Maybe find a way to separate their minds? Or are they just going to be a superhero, flying around and saving lives randomly? I have no idea, but I do want to know. I am invested enough in these characters that I would buy more comics. I just have to hope now that Milestone is going to choose to continue this story. Hidden within the drama is also some really good horror story vibes. Rereading this series for the write-up, I was really struck by the ending of issue 1 with how much like a horror film it felt. David walking into the lab late at night, this hunched-over inhuman monster standing there, chirping, and then the explosion. And then Kelly runs in. David is screaming, his body battered with shrapnel. His clothes are melting into his flesh as it burns. And then Kelly appears to be breaking down from the outside in as the nanobot swarm consumes her body. Holy God! Maybe it's reading this comic the week of Halloween. Maybe it is all of the thrillers and crime dramas that I've been watching lately. But wow! This moment sent chills down my spine. It doesn't really last anywhere beyond the first issue, but for that first issue, whew, that was great. If this story was a little more decompressed, that would have been the perfect place to end issue 1 as far as I'm concerned. Building from there, we have the idea of Kelly and David sharing a brain space, and all the repercussions that contains. After the pair realize their situation, David goes to Kelly's wake, because, as far as everyone else is concerned, she's dead, where he encounters her family, and Kelly has a running commentary going on in the background of David's mind the whole time. It is there that we meet Detective Trucco for the first time, and Kelly immediately goes, "This chick is hitting on you hard." And David's like, "I don't think that's true, and you know what, I'm gonna go get a glass of water." And when he gets up and Trucco walks away, he checks out her butt. And so does Kelly. Worse, she just doesn't see what he sees, like she's not just looking at Trucco's butt with him, she experiences what he experiences. And what must that feel like? To experience your partner's lust for another person. And given that Kelly says that she doesn't feel stimulus inside of the brain space on her own, the only sensations that she can feel are what David feels. So would she end up being grateful to feel, physically feel, the rushing blood of attraction, given that she's not going to feel it otherwise? And what about the other way, when David surrenders his body to her control? What does it feel like to have no control over your body, but still be conscious of what it is doing? To just trust your partner so completely that you just surrender your entire existence over to them. Duo has a lot of potential for some great body horror storytelling, especially once Kelly starts to turn David's hands into metal and claws and extends them out. Whew! As the more action-oriented of the pair, Kelly starts to manipulate the nanobots much more quickly and experiment with them than David does. So could Kelly just remake David's entire body using the nanobots? Like, could she just make his body become her body physically? And could David just adjust his body however he sees fit? There is a lot of potential in this comic for exploring self-image, especially when you have two competing self-images in one body. And even then, you would have the image of what your partner thinks you look like. So maybe David's like, you know what, I kind of want to tighten things up. I think I'd like to get some six-pack abs. But Kelly doesn't find that attractive. Could she counteract that effect? I don't know. And we don't really get a chance to explore any of that because the quieter, more personal level of storytelling is ultimately lost in the sci-fi, fantasy, superhero shuffle that the book ends up being caught in. Similarly, I have mixed feelings regarding the Immortals. First off, I like their basic concept. I would like to say that. The idea that there's a subset of humanity that just has a healing factor, and they have been alive and manipulating events for centuries, is really cool. That's neat. There are endless stories to be told within that idea, and I think that they are a great counterpoint concept to David and Kelly. You know, David and Kelly are new to the world of immortality. They're fresh and young and idealistic, and they're in love, so, nothing can go wrong, and everything should work out, and we just want to make the world a better place, guys. Meanwhile, the Immutables have been watching humanity screw things up over and over and over and over again. The Immutables present a potential endpoint for Kelly and David, and I think that that's a really great idea. But then, the Immutables themselves are such a mixed bag of concepts. We have Marius, right, who is their leader, and he presents himself as the brains of the operation. He is head of new research, after all, and he easily understands Kelly and David's presentation when they make it. So he feels like the brains of the group, too. Cool, that sounds great. But then we have Morian, who is a black man wearing armor and wielding a sword, who is eager to attack and kill the threat that is David and Kelly. Okay, so just like David and Kelly, we have a person who represents action and another person representing thought. That's a great balance, and getting to see these four characters, I suppose, interacting with each other is going to have some great contrast. But then, in the middle of the story, like in combat, Morian develops a vibrating sword that somehow counteracts the nanobot's frequency. So, when he stabs David in the chest with it, the nanobots in their body are rendered inert for a time, leaving them vulnerable. So how the floop did Morian develop this? How does he know what frequency the nanobots operate at? Is he meant to be both the warrior and the brains of the Immutables? If so, then what's the point of Ambrose, who is the guy who is shown using, hand scanners and opening dimensional portals? Ambrose feels like the tech guy in this comic, Marius feels like the brains, Morian feels like the muscle, but Morian is somehow all of those things in one. Which isn't inherently terrible, but that's a bad group dynamic. Then, at one point, Marius blasts Morian with this huge green energy blast, just like a Kamehameha out of nowhere. Gudrun appears to have, far-seeing abilities and hologram projection powers. All of the Immutables appear able to fly as well, or at least walk on clouds, which is just fancy flying. And we are given no explanation for any of those superpowers. Are these functions of their mutations? Are these characters just the X-Men? Or are these powers based in technology, like Morian's sword, or Ambrose's various pieces of technology, and you're just not telling me that? It makes more sense to me to have the Immutables just be immortals, with no additional superpowers, because that makes David and Kelly way more of a legit threat to them. The nanobots allow them to alter their body not just in appearance, but in substance, after all, going from flesh and blood to metal with a thought. David and Kelly can fly, they can fight, they can extend razor-sharp fingers and alter the cellular structures of other living beings/objects. By limiting the powers of the Immutables to just immortality, Pac could have made Kelly and David that much more threatening to them, which makes their escalation in tension that much more interesting.
Additionally, if the Immutables have a random assortment of superpowers, then their main gimmick feels way less important. It's just one more thing that they can do in a long laundry list of things that they can do. We also don't get an explanation for what the suicide bomber things are. Are they grown in a lab? Are they aliens? Are they from another dimension? How can Marius understand them when they don't speak a verbal language? Similarly, what's the deal with the irredeemable? They're bigger than the Immutables, they're all red-skinned, they have a much more notable amount of physical mutations like bat wings or horns, as well as physical mutilations like spike arms. Why are these characters so different from the Immutables? Again, is this some kind of genetic manipulation? Is this a technological process? When an immutable turns into a sociopath, do they also physically turn into a demon form? I don't know. We aren't told. And given that this comic has to introduce and establish the immutables and irredeemables and their role and function in the Milestone universe, I hate to say it, but I kind of think Greg Pak does a bit of a bad job here. To be fair, all of these questions aren't necessarily a bad thing if they get explored in the future. I would really love to see an Immutables miniseries exploring the backgrounds of these characters and how they work and what kind of impact they have had on world history. You could even have each issue of the series star a different Immutable, like you do Marius in issue 1, Morian in issue 2, so on and so forth, all set during different time periods. Especially since the Immutables investigate and control potential immortals, you'd think that someone would have checked on a man named Augustus Freeman, aka Icon, who's been alive and active for 200 years. Compared to a normal human, 200 years looks suspiciously like immortality to me. Who's got that job? And what did that encounter look like? I wanna know. Dr. Tinker is our last major component of the series, and I don't know about him. I mean, we've got a David and Kelly as a really good pairing, who represent careful thought and outright action, right? I've gone over this. And then we have the Immutables, who, from a conceptual standpoint, should exemplify careful thought, right? As they are characters who have all the time in the world to consider their actions. They are immortal. This should then balance well with Tinker, who is all action. This guy doesn't hesitate to do what he wants to do throughout the comic. He wants to study and use David, so he sends drones to kidnap him. He wants to reach out to David, so he sends drones into the heart of the Immutables business center, exposing himself as their enemy quite publicly, and he does it. He wants to stop David, he shoots him with a molecular disruptor. He wants to take advantage of the Irredeemable's attack to try to kill David. He shoots him with a molecular disruptor again. This guy is a brilliant jerk, and as an action man, he should be able to balance out the very careful and thoughtful Marius. But the Immutables are more than just Marius. Tinker really forces his way into this conflict as a third party, so he has to be dealt with within the nature of the comic, but he's just not very interesting. He's clearly an intelligent man, both in the world of technology and in dealing with other people. He makes very convincing sales pitches to both David and the Immutables, and if it weren't for Kelly's disgust and paranoia, David would probably be living in a female-shaped android body right now. Tinker has a lot of hallmarks of being an interesting character. He's smart, he's manipulative, he's selfish, he's like a solid corporate bad guy, but I just don't care. His motivations to stop the Immutables are fairly ill-defined. His desire to hurt or use David obviously makes him a bad guy, and he's just not very fun otherwise, where at least the Immutables are interesting. Tinker doesn't even have a cool look. He's just like evil Tony Stark. Which I suppose brings me around to the artwork. Artist Khoi Pham is not an artist that I get excited for. Pham has worked with author Greg Pak before. I specifically seem to recall them teaming up on the Incredible Hercules comic. I don't think that Pham is a very imaginative artist. I don't think that he draws emotions or has characters act very well, and generally, I just find his work to be utterly lacking. Pham is capable of delivering a monthly comic book experience, which is hard to do. Drawing 22 pages a month in and month out, is a challenging task, and Pham gets it done serviceably. I have to give him credit for that. He's paired with inker Scott Hanna and colorist Chris Sotomayor for this one, rounding out our creative team, and I lay a fair amount of my visual problems with this comic at Pham's feet. Because nothing in this book really stands out or feels like it belongs together. To be fair, I will say that Pham's pages are easy to follow. He draws backgrounds for most of the time to establish a scene really well. There are a variety of jump cuts, much like what I saw in Hardware or Icon and Rocket, but like the latter, Pham does enough artistic work to establish a new scene and a new locale that these jump cuts don't really bother me. For example, we go from the hospital after David wakes up immediately to the morgue with the turn of a page. This could be incredibly jarring, but Pham establishes a change in clothes on David really quickly and in scenery, telling me that some time has passed and we have moved locations. Pham also has a large cast of characters to draw, not just David and Kelly all of the time, but all of the Immutables, the Irredeemables, Tinker, his androids, and several large crowds of random background characters. And yet, still, the book came out on time, and it's readable. I have to give him credit for that. On the other side, David and Kelly's superhero form is absolutely uninspired. They end up wearing a gold and white jumpsuit, where the majority of it is a gold pea color, but they have on white gloves, boots, a belt-esque section. I can't tell if it's an actual belt or if it's just to break up the image of the suit, and a colored area. It honestly looks like a Fantastic Four costume, just missing that big ol' 4 in the chest and the color blue. This costume does nothing to hint at Kelly and David's shared existence, which is honestly the hook of the comic. It does nothing to hint at what they're able to do, like fly or super strength or change their body. It has no ties to their nanobot origins. Okay, I suppose it does have ties to the nanobots. The nanobot cloud is generally depicted in a golden color, and of course the suit is largely gold, so there you go. Wow. Strangely, the suit also only comes into existence once David has absorbed his attackers in the woods. This implies to me that the clothing was made from the attackers' molecules, which is disturbing and gross, and I kind of love that idea, but it also means that David's unconscious mind shaped his costume, because he didn't think about it. He didn't go, I need a costume, it just appeared on him. But Kelly is the one who has a crush on superheroes. Kelly wears t-shirts for both Wonder Woman and Superman in this comic, so why does David's mind design a supersuit? And a fairly lackluster one at that. In researching for this episode, I read an interview with Greg Pak and Khoi Pham online, and Pham says that the design was meant to evoke, quote, that old-school superhero feel, end quote. So I think that the Fantastic Four costume is a good comparison, as they're meant to be explorers and scientists, not necessarily superheroes. And the same is basically true for David, but this still lacks an individual personality, and it smacks of the same problem that I had with Icon and Rocket. Similarly, the design of the Immutables kills me. The idea that these characters have been alive for hundreds, if not thousands of years, and yet they still wear whatever clothes they used to wear in those olden times, doesn't make any sense to me. The whole point of the Immutables is that they blend in and hide in the shadows of society, and you can't do that when you're wearing a breastplate, a big red cape, and walking around with a sword on your hip. Unless you're a cosplayer, and Maureen doesn't really seem like he's into cosplay. Even if the idea is that these are battle clothes or costumes that the Immutables wear when they're going into a combat situation, why would someone like Maureen wear armor? He's immortal. He doesn't need armor. Why does he carry a sword and not a gun? And if these are battle clothes, then why does Marius wear a suit the whole time? The visual concepts for the Immutables are discordant and strange. That same problem that I had with Icon, Rocket, and Duo's looks, where they're saying, we're just superheroes, but nothing more specific, is exactly the same problem the Immutables have, but worse. Their costumes just say that they're stuck in the past. But these are also characters who've, mastered super science, and just, ugh. Out of all the characters, Tinker is probably the most solidly designed, but like I said, he's just basically evil Tony Stark. He wears a nice business suit with a red button-up underneath, and black and red are generally bad guy colors in the parlance of comic books. He's got dark hair, he's got facial hair, he sells it. It works. It's not a notable or unique look, but it does make sense for the world that he inhabits of corporate business and stabbing people in the back. His androids are humanoid in appearance, with cold, hard faces and armored bodies. They're all specifically white, they're not gray, they are wearing white shells. They look like an army of robotic drones. So that works. As for the irredeemables, I guess their look does scream we're monstrous bad guys, so they nail that. But I have the same problem here that I mentioned before. Why do they look so different from the immutables? How did these changes happen? Why did these changes happen? A part of me wants to guess that the idea of hell in the Milestone universe was actually historically inspired by the immutables and the irredeemable. Those that have done wrong are then banished to a dimension of punishment and exile on Earth? Sounds a lot like the heaven and hell concept. Even the general appearance of the irredeemable make them look like demons, so I could see an ancient man witnessing a fight between Marius and one of the irredeemable, and they're throwing around energy blasts and flying around, and what kind of context would you have? Except an angel and demon battling, and then the angel sentencing the demon to hell. But that's not what this comic is about, so no one says that. That's just a theory. A fan theory. Colorist Sotomayor also worked on another Milestone comic, Hardware, but I have to admit that I found his work in Duo kinda lacking. Hardware was a very dark book, which really fit Cowan and Sankowitz's penciling style and the general tone of Curtis's adventure. But the plus side of a dark book is that any kind of energy effect looks super bright and noticeable. They really pop because of that contrast. With Duo, this book is just much brighter in general. Khoi Pham uses very few shadows or black areas in his pencils. He does almost no shading work at all. So everything in the comic ends up looking lit and bright. So you get a lot of highlights that are being laid down on the characters in the coloring phase, even if there isn't really an established light source for a scene. This is sometimes done to add shape and physical form to the faces of the characters, most often in my memory inside of Kelly and David's head. And that is a nice touch, but it kinda looks incredibly fake, and it lacks the vibrancy that we saw in Hardware. Again, I don't think that the colorist here is bad. Sotomayor does not do a bad job. Everything looks right, everything is colored well, but again, it's nothing special, and it doesn't give the book a unique look at all, and it just makes it feel less than when I think about Sotomayor working on Hardware. I would like to give a quick super props to cover artist Daike Ruan and Miguel Muerto. Ruan has been doing covers for Marvel's Shang-Chi comics lately, and I love his art. It's very angular and sharp. Clearly, there's a bit of inspiration from anime and manga, but the proportions and physical form of his characters are much more human-looking. There's maybe a little Chinese manhua style in there, but I'm very unsure on that. But the covers look pretty cool. They are eye-catching. The coloring on them is bright and vibrant. The covers for issue 1 and 6 are especially eye-catching. If you get a chance to Google Duo Milestone issue 1 or issue 6, you're going to see some gorgeous looking covers. Overall, Duo is an enjoyable drama, exploring how a man and woman live together when put into an extremely uncomfortable situation. David and Kelly are a compelling partnership, filled with contrast and compliments, and I honestly want to see more of their adventures. But their story is bogged down by too many additional characters with ill-thought-out concepts that just don't add to Kelly and David's story. Rather, they distract from it. There is a lot of potential to those characters, and again, I would love to see that potential explored. But when contained to this 6-issue miniseries, I'm ultimately left with more questions than thrills. I would say that Duo is probably The third highest rated Milestone book for me at this point, though. Icon and Rocket are number one because the book's just overall so solidly done. Then we've got Static, which had great character work, and now Duo, ending with Hardware, because that book felt like it was fighting me the whole way, and I spent a whole 3 episodes talking about it, so I'm not going to harp on it too much here. With Duo, it feels like there are questions left that frustrate me, but it also feels like there are answers to those questions. It's just that Greg Pak didn't have time to explore them. So if given a chance to do more, I'd love to see it. Next week, we'll be rounding out our look at the new Milestone universe with their final title, Blood Syndicate. Back in the Milestone Returns one-shot, we learned that there was a Bang Baby calling himself Holocaust, and that he was putting together a crew. We see exactly what he's been planning all of this time and what he can do, as well as those who stand against him. If anyone can stand against him. Join me in a week for episode 22.8 of Comic Book Breakdown, Blood Syndicate.
Everyone, there are a million podcasts vying for your time and attention, and I'd like to thank you for listening to mine. If you would like to get in touch with me to share a concern, request a series, compliment me, berate me, whatever you like, send me an email at cbbreakdown@gmail.com. Otherwise, thanks for listening.